Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Beyond Pilots webinar. I'm going to just check to see that the screen sharing is working, and it looks like it is from our technical people here in the room. Awesome. Welcome. We've got a packed agenda today to talk about all things smart lighting, all things 3000K lighting, some pretty amazing guest speakers, and lots of time for Q&A. Before anything, I'd like to acknowledge that we here in this room are dialing in from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm going to jump into some housekeeping in a second. Before I do, if you're on mute, if you're not on mute, please just chuck yourself on mute. I can hear a little bit of background noise. This is what we're going to do today, a little bit of just welcome, housekeeping, get into some background and context and why. Hello, whoever that is. Are you able to just turn yourself on mute, please? And Charlotte, I'm not sure, potentially you can do some background wizardry and make everyone join on mute. A bit of background and the rationale for doing this webinar now. We'll look at some key projects that we've been working on over the last 4 or 5 years, probably about 20, 30, or it might even be up to 40 or 50 now, and the lessons that we've got around smart lighting, some high-level do's and don'ts. Then we've got Karen Jones, the project team lead, city strategy at the City of Parramatta, who's going to talk to our, one of the biggest, I think it's the biggest completed street smart lighting project in Australian history, Sal Barone, who I don't know if is here yet, but is going to talk from the distribution business side of things from Endeavour Energy, and Julian Chisnall, who's the principal advisor at Road Safety New Zealand Transport Agency, to talk about how they've been going, especially with 3000K lighting. My name is Alexi Lynch. I'm the operations manager at Ironbark Sustainability, and also on the line we've got I think kind of the who's who of smart lighting and street lighting from projects around Australia. My colleagues Ross McCurdy and Abhishek Welly in the room, and Paul Brown, Keith Harwood and James Tate online, who are going to be in the background answering any questions that you've got. We'll try and have a bit of time for QA and discussion at the end, and I've got that final item there because after this webinar you can download the webinar pack, which includes this information and the slides that we've got here, but also a couple of key documents and reports that we think might be pretty valuable to have on hand. We're going to keep it pretty informal, as we always do in these webinars. We are recording, and just a reminder to please mute yourself. Makes life a lot easier. You can jump into the chat. We all know how to do that now. If you've got clarifying questions, we'll ask the crew here on board and online to just jump in and answer them as we go along. And we've got some bigger questions that came in advance that we'll be getting to and then opening it up to the floor. If you can, turn your camera on. It's so much nicer to see that than that. We all know what it's like. I'm sure some people are actually in bed or shy or embarrassed or low bandwidth or whatever, but if you are able to turn your camera on, it does make things a little bit nicer. So just really quickly, Ironbark Sustainability, this is the lighting team that work on projects around smart lighting, street lighting, energy efficient lighting, audit, project management, design, software, everything that works, and have been for about 20 years. Most people in the room would know most of these spaces. We've got about 25, 30 odd people at Ironbark. They're just the ones that were in that day that work on lighting. We're actually a bit bigger than that. So we also have a broader climate program at Ironbark as well that I'm just going to touch on really quickly, because I am aware that a lot of people who are in this room have many hats. We've got some people who work in assets and lighting, but some who are maybe in the broader climate, energy or sustainability side of things. And just a little bit of news for those that don't know. A couple of years ago, Ironbark teamed up with Beyond Zero Emissions and got some cash from the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation to develop this website called Snapshot Climate. Someone's going to chuck into the chat now. And just for those that don't know it yet, we do have the environment, climate, energy people here. I can see some rocks and some JOs. Just note that this is online and free for every single council in Australia, all 537 of them. We also have state and electorate snapshots, and you can access them. And the reason I mention it now is that last week we also just released our snapshot sponsorship prospectus for 2023. So You want to be able to say to your community that you're providing them emissions data. Check it out. If you're not within that climate or environment area, please pass it on to maybe your sustainability teams and get in touch. If I could ask again just everyone to mute themselves for those that might have forgotten before we move on to you. Is a bit of a idea of who's in the room. This was done last Friday, so we've had some extra people jump on board since then, but we've got a smattering of people from all around Australia, the majority from New South Wales and then Vic. We asked a couple of questions and we always try and provide this info back to people just so I guess you know who's in the room, and we also use this when we're looking at the content and the copy and I guess who's speaking. Most people weren't sure actually whether they had a smart lighting strategy within their council. We had about a quarter that definitely do and a bit under a quarter that are looking into it. Most people or councils have not been involved in a smart lighting project or pilot. The red is no, the orange not sure, and the greens are yes, especially those that yes have completed or yes have been involved in a pilot are the darker greens. And you don't have to read through this slide, but just to give you an indication of the sort of questions that came through in advance, we had a lot on human health, biodiversity, couple on 3000K, and the data side of smart lighting, the funding and cost side, technology, specific state and regional queries, and then some other comments. And we'll get to all we can. Whatever we don't, we'll look at developing a Q&A doc, or we'll just actually contact those that missed out. All right. We go back to 2000. If I can, again, just ask you to unmute yourselves. Just before something happened in the world in early 2020, but only 3 or 4 years ago, we put on this smart lighting webinar, and we're looking at projects and from all around Australia and some trends that we had back then were around sharing information, sharing what was working, what wasn't working in the broader field of smart lighting, because it was early days and wanted to make sure that any lessons were shared. Preparation was pretty key. So a lot of planning, prep and design before undertaking projects. Another theme that had come through from projects that there was often discussion about whether you're putting up smart ready or smart enabled lights. And from some of the presentations in the projects from 3 or 4 years ago, I remember in particular City of Melbourne and Glen Ira saying smart ready is maybe a bit of a cop-out because you're unlikely to actually go back and put smarts in there. And finally, we had some challenges around governance, which is really only now being fixed in some pockets. And I think a fair bit of improvement to go there. We did have pilots throughout Australia. Pretty much every distribution business did have pilot projects. So all throughout Australia, we were learning quite a bit. And we put on this webinar in late 2019, which is really interesting to look back at now at some of these projects. And just to give you a bit of a flavour of where we were at, we had these urban heat smart pilot in Wyndham. We had these little Adelaide, Marion and Adelaide Hills and surrounds in South Australia, Ipswich, Moreton Bay and Ryde. We're talking 20 to maybe 50, 100 lights per project. Some bigger ones, so Newcastle and some smart poles with some funding they had from the Hunter Development Corporation, which certainly makes life easier. Our first EPC lighting project in the ACT. City Botanical Gardens, who were able to undertake a project, again, with some funding or some co-funding from Optus. And similarly in Darwin, we often see what we've found is that some of these sort of bigger, more interesting or sexy projects, if you like, benefited from funding that was external. So in Darwin, they had federal funding at the time that really made them able to implement this pretty amazing project. We also looked further afield internationally at this webinar a couple of years ago. So San Diego, and their take on smart lighting was to do what Google do and learn from tech, push the boundaries. They've investigated governance, especially around surveillance in public spaces, which I know now has become quite topical with the lizard people in certain northern suburbs of Adelaide. LA linking to tech, and of course, trying to make sure that they weren't blazing the night away. We prefer our Bendigo example just because it's closer to home. We looked at the Nordic regions and what they were doing with lighting, colour and temperature, and France, where they have stated that outdoor lighting cannot exceed 3000K with time limits on lighting for certain areas at times at all. So Some great background there if you want to look at some projects and how they were going, and also some 101 smart lighting info. One thing we did also realise, or we found in 2019, were that the project that we were working with actually had decent payback periods and were becoming financially viable. However, we all know that there was this big asterisk around this. So this is sort of from the early pilots, the financial savings from mainly dimming, trimming and constant light output. However, the big challenge we had was around whether or not you're actually able to capture the savings. And so this is from a conference in, there we go, 2019, with Mr. Paul Brown, who's on the call today, and some of the key distribution businesses, councils, and David Ripper, who I think is the key contact or the person at AMO, I believe. We might try and get an update on that now. Before I pass over to the big, awesome Parramatta project, I'm just going to go through some of the ones that we've worked on, and then I can touch on the key learnings across these. So this is Glen Ira, and the purpose was just around testing and checking and trying to force maybe some distribution businesses who are dragging their feet a little bit to get involved in these projects. And so this is when really it was a bit of a blank canvas. And so I think a lot of these earlier councils took risks that we could then share learnings and share things don't work with everyone. One of the things that we found from Glen Ira, 300 odd lights, was there were some really great results around dimming commands. They were fast and accurate. Network coverage was fantastic. Good payback periods as well. Noting, of course, that there's that asterisk around the capturing of the metered lighting reductions. Some of the big challenges, though, were around integration into DNSP systems and CMSs, so really clunky. So to give you an example, often the CMSs require a lot of work, even for intermediate users. So you really had to be an expert and read the 1,000-page document guidebook just to understand, for example, the 178 different fault codes that might come up. Bayside, another small one, the purpose was just to test the networks. And what we found there were similar kind of results. The technology worked really quickly. We had some pretty cool environmental benefits for this project, but again, the CMSs were a bit of a challenge. We've got a project that is getting a lot larger, and this is not complete and it's early days, but I think it's worth noting. So WA are going to be looking at replacing about 46,000 lights with smart LEDs. And I think the informal way to say it is councils have basically said to Western Power, we want to ducks all lined up before we commit with governance and operating protocols, how we're going to request dimming and trimming and how the data works. And so what we see in something like this is a great opportunity to improve on all of those previous projects when it comes to governance. And, you know, we now have a bit of a knowledge bank of the challenges and the opportunities. From the others, we've been able to earmark governance and clunky CMS problems, and so we can address it iteratively as we improve. And finally, Geelong, who have put in, I think 25,000 odd, or I'm not sure where the update is here, or James or Ross might be able to jump into the chat here, but they went ahead with all of their PCAT lights for smart, which is interesting because there might not be the financial business case there, because as we all know, for PCAT lights, it's not like you can reduce the lighting levels too much further, but they were looking at future-proofing and potentially other non-financial benefits that they might see down the track. There's relationships between the DNSPs and the councils, which are sort of helping things along there, and there's no CMS yet, I understand, but there might be some changes because this moves pretty quick. So having looked back at 2019 and those 30, 40 projects, and then some of the recent ones now, we got the lighting team together and tried to find out from all of those, what are the sort of high level things that we need to keep in mind, or things that are worth sharing. The first is not to apply generic dimming settings. So you can't just say, right, we've got a road or we've got a couple of hundred lights and we're just going to look at 35% across the board. What happens there is that you miss out on additional savings and might be creating non-compliance in some areas. So you could have, for example, 3 lights in a row that should stay at 100%, one that might even be able to go down to 35%, and the others could go 60%. And so you want to make sure that you've got, you're looking at a light per light, I guess, in that situation. There's a lot of variability between councils as well. And so one clear thing was the energy and financial benefits can be speculation until you know your lighting levels. So rural councils, for example, probably have 30 to 50% non-compliant, and so dimming and trimming might not be as viable. So you need to know where your playing field is. The business case can be a bit of speculation. When you get into the detail, you really know where you're going. Generally, we would advise don't spend too much on residential streets. Main roads, yes, absolutely for smarts, for financial reasons. However, if you've got significant environmental areas and want to switch off lighting, for example, it can be financially viable. And some councils are actually looking at this, which is interesting. CMSs are really overwhelming for the casual user. To get the info that you want from a regular CMS, what's light 57A doing? Is it a fault? Which of the 158 faults are the bad ones can be really challenging. And so we know that there are a couple of DNSPs that we're working with at the moment to best deal with this. And finally, governance protocols still need to be formalised. So we've got DNSPs and councils still, I guess, trying to understand who can make the call and, what can be actually undertaken. We're getting there, but that's probably one of the areas that still needs the most work since 2019. All right. I am now going to hand to Karen Jones, Project Team Leader, City Strategy from the City of Parramatta in New South Wales. Karen leads the Parramatta Smart Lighting Program. She's got 2 decades of delivering environmental, educational and community projects, programs and initiatives to connect and balance people and planet. One of the guiding forces behind this particular project, and she's going to take us through this awesome project. So Karen, perfect. We can see your screen. I'm going to mute myself now and over to you.
Thank you for the lovely introduction, and to everyone around Australia and New Zealand, thank you for tuning in. Our approach here at the City of Parramatta was really to take a street light, which everyone walks past and never really thinks about, from an infrastructure to a community asset. This presentation is in partnership, so I'll be covering the why we did the project, and then we'll have Endeavour Energy and Ironbark going the what and how. We're giving you very much the high level dot points, hoping that will open up to questions. So I can see from the questions already we may not get through them all. As you read our welcome traditional recognition on the screen, I also want us to consider that traditional owners and First Nations connection to country is 24/7. It is day and night, and the connection is to the land, the water and the skies. For those that are familiar with some of the First Nations astronomy, it's not just being able to see the stars, but the space between the stars. And we've got the Dark Emu formation, courtesy of ABC News there. Light pollution is a big component of reducing their connection to country. And the other thing to take on board is seasons and the rhythm of our natural environment. Lights in an urban area are reducing the dawn and dusk vitality of our nature. So I know street lights are only a part of the light pollution, but if we are serious about our commitment to country and our First Nation recognition, we need to do better with our night skies. From a Parramatta point of view, we have 3 documents that give us leadership. We do have an environment strategy, an innovation and smart strategy, and a big shout out to Western Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils, or WESROC. We're part of the councils, and I know there's many on the line today, for the Western Sydney Energy Program, where on behalf of all of our communities in Western Sydney, we're really wanting to reduce our emissions, of which street lighting is part of it. In terms of why, we do have the strategy with a target of 6% emission reduction by 2038. Our baseline of 2014-15 identified that 50% of our corporate emissions are coming from street lighting. So it's a bit of a no-brainer that if we're going to reach our target, we need to do something in the street lighting space. What we also need to take on board is that we have just over 15,000 streetlights. We cover 2 different DNSPs. The non-colour on the map on the right is Endeavour Energy, and the pink colour is Ausgrid. And we're doing this project with both of them, but we're presenting on the pioneer one with Endeavour Energy today. We started off our LED upgrades on the residential roads, so all the roads not coloured in, we've already updated to LED, and we did that through Wes Rock and SS Rock, so Southern and South Sydney with the Ausgrid one. But we're focusing in on the 36% of our lights on major roads. The blue lines that you can see on the map are the state roads that are managed by council. The yellow is our regional major roads. We've got one red local major road up in the Ausgrid area. We are the road manager and we are responsible for road and pedestrian lighting, while Endeavour and Ausgrid own the assets. So it's quite a unique space that Australia's in that we pay for the service but don't own the asset. We did a business case. I'm just going to draw us to the two blue lines. Over the 20 years, which is the life asset of a light, we're going to have a $7.6 million saving. The total cost for this project was $5.55 million. So already it's a no-brainer for our financial people that by doing the upgrade, we'll be ahead. We were really fortunate to the federal government, the local LRCI, Local Roads Community Infrastructure Fund. It's been fully funded. So technically council is $7.2 million ahead, which again makes our finance people very happy. We're also looking at the emissions. So the second blue row there, just under 3,000 tonnes per year. Our next major single electricity use is our Riverside Theatres. That's the equivalent of running our Riverside Theatres for 4 years pre-COVID. So it's a massive saving that we just don't realise because it's cut into 15,000 different lights and not seen as one big identity. Why we did it, the images on the left are our mercury vapor lights and the images on the right are LED. Primarily, it's for road safety. That is what councils are about. We're wanting to minimise and reduce accidents and pedestrian. So you can see in those photos, the light is better. It's more consistent. There's less dark spots. So that's a big why why we wanted to do it. We're also really conscious that wildlife are incredibly important. The image on your left is one of our bushlands along a creek line, and the dots at each light that's part of the project. We have chosen three species. We've got the bogong moth, which migrates from North Australia down through Sydney. It often gets distracted by the light pollution of Sydney and doesn't continue onto the high country. It's an important food source for the endangered mountain pygmy possum. If the moths don't make it to the high country, the mountain pygmy possums could die out. So pretty critical that we need them to come through Sydney on their way up. We also have the most important long distance pollinator, the grey-headed flying fox. Again, lighter over waterways when they drink can have an impact on them. And the willy wagtail is one of our nocturnal breeders. The song is very important for the male to attract the mates, and lighting through research from Monash at Melbourne University is showing that we could lose the willy wagtail in our urban areas because of lighting challenges. So we wanted to bring them in on this project. Each dot on this map is a light, and on the right-hand side, different colour coding for different categories and compliance. But basically, this is what Endeavour Energy were going to do, a like-for-like replacement. The smart part of our lighting design is we had a look at what would not be compliant with a like-for-like LED, and then we've worked with Ironbark and Endeavour to go, okay, we want to get the red lights, the red dots, to be compliant. How do we do that? Through lighting design. So it does improve our lighting compliance, which again is a big key part. We also did this because we want to be able to communicate with the lights. For those of you involved in lights, you know when a resident complains to yourself or the DNSP, there could be a 3-week delay for the nighttime inspection, and then it gets rostered into the works program to change. This gives us live coverage. Each of those blue dots is a light. We can see from any computer if it's working, if it's on. It allows for anything follow-up to be done maintenance-wise to be programmed. There will still be some nighttime inspections, but it really reduces that time frame. And for those of us working in local council, it's all about reputation. And if we can progress those customer communications and lighting issues quicker, it makes us all look good. What we also wanted to do, so another part of the why, is to show that the smarts can produce extra financial and emission savings. So what we've got here is an extra 44% energy savings on top of what LED would have done on their own. So it is quite a drop there. And what our programming is, we'll let Ross go through with that detail. We didn't want to miss the opportunity to demonstrate our leadership, and shout out to Endeavour Energy's comms manager and our comms team. We worked really hard on the messaging. There's a lot of collateral there created that for any council going down, or DNSP going down this track, a lot there that we can use. It was one of our largest reaching environment programs. Once you take out flood alerts and that sort of thing, really in positive comps, so that it's good for our reputation. The last why that I'll share with you had to do with an unexpected outcome. Different to residential streets, a lot of our major road technology is old and outdated, and I had a lot of these boxes on the poles, like our capacitors, igniters, surge arresters and choke boxes, that was needed to fire up the lights. The new LEDs don't require any of these, and because we're on track for a 95% recycling from this project, which is our New South Wales EPA target, these were originally going to go into landfill. So part of our why was to set up an e-waste recycling. And what the beauty of this is, Endeavour will now do this for all of the other councils doing upgrades. And shout out to Ausgrid, who already had that set up, so we didn't have to work with them. But we do have all of the contract clauses for that process if required. So that's a very high level 5-minute run through of the why. And now I'll hand over to Sal for the what.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. That's awesome. And I take it you're going to stay on the line too, because we will get some questions. And before I get to Sal, I might just ask you a couple of quick clarifying questions that we've got here in the chat. The first one, someone says, I think it's a question, does Parramatta manage state roads?
So these are the state roads under council management. So there are a variety of classifications, local and regional, which were the first two that we started with, so 3,300 lights. And then we moved on to the council managed state roads. We do work with Transport for New South Wales, so Ross will probably cover a little bit of that, but we don't cover the state managed state roads. So like Sydney Harbour Bridge is an example of a state road that is managed by state government, but we do have state classified roads managed by local government. It's all very confusing. There'll be questions at the end for people to earn their coffee if they get all the answers right.
Thank you. And before we do go to Sal, I might just then a quick thing on the what then, I guess, Ross, and maybe this is a question, perfect timing there from Majdi. What method did you use to identify the lights that don't comply with the lighting standards? I've actually stolen one of your extra lights here, Karen. Ross said that's the best one to put up. Do you want to just take us through that briefly, Ross, before we jump to Sal?
Yeah, sure. So, well, starting with that question, what method did we use to identify the streets that do not comply with the lighting standards? So, as part of Ironbark support to council was a design analysis process, a compliance assessment process, where we mapped all of the lights, and Karen showed a slide before with lots of color-coded dots, which showed the lighting classification that each light met in relation to the Australian standards, whether or not it met that standard or not. And that also took into account the road classification, and council and various stakeholders were able to review that compliance assessment and identify where compliance was or non-compliance was a problem, and where they might like to do something other than a straight like-for-like LED replacement and try and bring that stretch of road or those few lights up to compliance. What Lex is showing now is a screenshot of the portal or software that we use to walk council through this. It's called Opticity. You can see those vertical columns there. Each one of those represents a light. The shadowy tallest bit of the column represents the full output of each individual light, and then the orange or yellow column within that is showing the level to which the light is able to be trimmed or dimmed. So as Lex was saying earlier, it's not a case of one solution for every light. You've got to look at each light individually in its own context to work out how far you can dim or trim it to hit the required standard. So this is, a great visual representation of that. Maybe the only other thing to say about the council's approach to smarts was that the lights have been programmed to dim from, most of them have been programmed to dim from about 11 p.m. till 4 a.m, where council knows that the traffic volumes drop off significantly based on traffic volume data. So that's the approach that we've taken so far.
Awesome.
To add to that, Ross, the dimming is still compliant with Australian standards. So from a road management point of view, it is still safe. And if anything was to happen, we've complied with the Australian standard.
Exactly. And maybe just finally on Transport for New South Wales. So the next stage of Council's project is very much focused on those state road lights. So Transport for New South Wales has more of an interest in those, and they're being drawn into that discussion around standards and compliance and the extent to which lights are trimmed or dimmed and at what time of the day. So that's that'll be a key part of the planning process for the next stage for the project.
Thanks, Ross. And there were a few questions that came around funding and specifically how councils, state utilities and state governments work together. We probably won't be able to get into that into too much detail now because it is a little bit different in every jurisdiction. And so I know, for example, in Victoria, you've actually got councils who are essentially putting up the upfront costs for those cost shared roads, and the state government are then paying it back through the savings. So we've got different approaches in different states. I might just jump to Sal, who I believe is on the call, Business Relations Manager, Endeavour Energy. 10 years, over the last 10 years, Sal's managed street lighting projects with councils throughout the Endeavour Energy area, including the Parramatta one. Sal, I'm just going to throw a few questions to you. And the first one is that you've never done anything at this scale before. I understand it's just been small scale pilots. So from the DNSP point of view, what were the key challenges for you in delivering this for Parramatta?
Well, thanks, Lex. Look, I suppose just starting was probably the first challenge, right? Understanding councils' wants and needs, and trying to help deliver a project that, you know, from as a DNSP's perspective, there was three key main issues for us: was environmental, technology, and cost to serve. We appreciate, you know, the environment, not only your tree and fauna type, but your environment in terms of the community, the people that live within these areas. So when starting this journey, we wanted to introduce new LEDs with the capability of being able to dim and trim the public lighting way that enabled a more uniformity saturation of lighting. So from a DNSP's perspective, we're able to help facilitate councils provide a better service to the community and a lighting consistency across public lighting. And also too, from a cost to serve perspective, right? So we appreciate technology is evolving really, really quickly in this space. So we did not want, you know, councils to be in a position that where they introduce something and then unfortunately is redundant within the next 5 years. We worked very closely with Karen, and this is something that I absolutely appreciate the support from Parramatta Council in the fact that they are prepared to move in this space. I appreciate that the New South Wales public lighting, a lot of our road carriageways, we need to meet a certain standard of lighting, and dimming and trimming is very much a contentious discussion. And to Karen's comment earlier, all dimming and trimming still does comply with the New South Wales public lighting roadway, but we do have opportunity. And for those who are elbow deep in, you know, the transition from old technology to LED lighting, often, I'm not going to say often, but there is the likelihood in some of the cases where we're actually overlighting because of the LED's efficiencies as opposed to some of the old technology. It's a bit of a long-winded answer for you, Lex, but yeah.
No, not at all. Thank you. And yeah, it is. It's never that. It never is that straightforward. Now that you've done it, I guess, is there anything that you would do differently now that it's been rolled out? Like, what are the 2 or 3 things that you might do differently for the next council that comes knocking on your door?
Yeah, good questions. I suppose some of the key learnings as a DNSP we come to understand was more around the operational challenges that we had. One being, you know, for smarts to function, we needed to have a 24/7 supply. Now, our current network does not necessarily have all lighting 24/7 supply. So that was one of the things that we quickly identified, that where we had a smart node, we needed to convert the light to 24/7 supply. So I think from our perspective, some more planning in that space and understanding what that looks like in terms of delivery. The other is the mechanism in which that the lights identified, or the nodes identified the lights that are out, for instance, as recorded as a fault. When we convert the network to a 24/7 supply, impacts where we had operational, where the network had an outage for upgrades or something, other works happening on the network, would thus then let the node know that there was no supply there. And some of those things, I suppose we would work closer in location specifics to help minimize that, or false reporting is basically where I was leading to.
Sorry, I'm struggling to unmute myself, which I've done there.
Yeah.
Well, a question before, and I'm sure we've got a lot of questions that'll come in through the chat for you as well, Sal. But before we go to Julian, who's going to talk about 3000K lighting, do you have an approach to 3000K lighting yet, as far as an approved process?
Yeah, look, 3,000, 4,000 are a very contentious discussion, right? From Endeavour Energy's perspective, we support what's the approved product. And I'm not sitting on the fence in this space, but, in New South Wales, public lighting roads are categorised. So my P3, 4 and 5, we very much support the 3K. One of the reasons for supporting the 3K was to help eliminate some glare issues in those residential areas. On our V category roads, where the wattage is higher, we've opted to maintain a 4K output for our V1 high and low. So our 400 watt HPS replacements, we've opted to retain the 4K. I think from Endeavour Energy's perspective, we look at the technology available at the time, and historically, the higher the Kelvin output meant the more efficient the light was. So thus making that we were able to reduce the wattages of the LEDs if we maintain a 4K. We're now at a stage where we're able to produce similar wattage savings in 3K. And if they meet the Road Standard Act, then that's definitely the direction we want to take.
Awesome. Thanks, Sal. We were discussing whether we need to have a separate webinar about this, and I think it's potentially something we do. It's a big discussion. If you can stay on the line, much appreciated.
Absolutely.
We're now going to use that as a bit of a segue to introduce and welcome our guest from over the ditch, Julian. Welcome aboard. Julian's the Principal Advisor from Road Safety New Zealand Transport Agency. Heads up road safety at NZTA, where he's worked in lots of different roles over decades, and has been involved in street lighting LED projects across the NZTA network. And he's going to spend a bit of time giving us some background on their experience with 3000K lighting, because they've got a lot more than us. And so this is a great opportunity. We really appreciate it, Julian. Over to you.
Kia ora. No problem at all. I'm happy to share. I guess our journey started a little bit earlier than Australia's. We were probably starting down this path back in about 2008. I helped draft, and I've got to be careful because there's some other draftees on the call from New Zealand, but we drafted our first national specification back in 2013, 2014 time, making a major move from high pressure sodium across to LED. We sort of ditched mercury vapor a few years before that. So at the time we moved, very much the same as Karen and Sal have been saying, we've had the 3,000, 4,000 argument. We started out with 4,000 as well, primarily because of that efficacy issue. In the early days, Cat P lighting luminaires were available. Cat V was only really starting to enter into the market. The cost was kind of prohibitive. So Waka Kotahi is an interesting entity in that respect, that we're both a road controlling authority for the state highway network in New Zealand, but we are also the standards body, or the design guidance body nationally for local councils as well as the state highways. So I sit on that side of the fence. I sit on the program and standards team and deal with the national standards, but I get dragged into arguments and discussions across all parts of the country. So I guess current thinking in New Zealand at the moment, we're still in the 4,000 space as a starting point. We're always looking to tweak those decisions, and there have been many occasions where 3,000 has ended up being the agreed solution. Again, Sal was saying about 24/7 supply. Yes, we're always CMS aware. Moving our street lighting circuits off ripple control from the old water heater controls from probably the 1930s, 1940s era through to a 24/7 supply allows for introduction of controls and outage response. Where we have moved to 3,000K has been in generally more isolated locations where we've got an issue with lighting for other reasons, and where the change is going to be essentially uniform across a small area. So Kaikoura District Council on the northeastern coast of the South Island, we have an issue there with the Huttons shearwater, breeding and migratory bird. Again, they have a problem discerning the difference between a slightly blue lit road surface and water. And so we have these issues with fallout. So Kaikoura District Council, which is a small community and an isolated location in a rural area, we basically agreed to go 3,000 right across. The same in the South Wairarapa, the lower reaches of the North Island. They were recently granted international dark skies. And again, a number of smaller urban centres, very small actually, with some isolated intersections. So again, the difference between dark to 4,000 at an isolated intersection or dark to 3,000 is neither here nor there. So we just said, look, go 3,000, not a problem. One area where we have done something a little different was in the city of Dunedin at the lower end of the South Island. They were looking to go 3,000 throughout their urban area. We have a number of state highways operating through that urban area, but the speed limits on all of those state highways are 80 kilometres an hour or below. So we felt any loss, based on research and so on, based on any loss of visual acuity that we lose by going from 4,000K down to 3,000K was offset by that reduction in operating speed. So there was no net loss of safety performance. So again, Dunedin went 3,000, we went 3,000 on all the state highways. We also have a couple of locations where we're lower than 3,000. Aoraki Mackenzie, Mount John National Observatory has a long-standing acceptance for 2,200 Kelvin. We went from mercury vapor to low pressure sodium there. They went to high amber, high pressure sodium for a long time, and now they've gone to 2,200 LED. So that's purely because of the international status of the observatory. And then another one we've just been working on, I'll show you some photos of all of these a bit later on, the Western Petro, the Taiko, a place called Punakaiki, Pancake Rocks on the west coast of the South Island. We actually turn the lights off completely on the state highway and in the local community every year for the breeding season. So rather than lots of words on a screen, I thought I'll show you some photos. A lot of work's been done in Auckland, being our largest metropolitan centre, about 140,000 lights there. Nationally, we have about 370,000 luminaires. So I like to refer to New Zealand as a fiscally and geographically challenged small city, where we've got not many lights, but spread over a large area. So you can see there Auckland going from high pressure sodium down to LED with quite positive results in terms of visual acuity. One of the key things that I notice in a lot of these photos when I'm looking at them is how well the road markings stand out, which does assist in road safety, obviously. Local street in Wellington, where I used to live, same street, same time of night. Obviously very different going from high pressure sodium to LED. much better colour continuity. And again, these are all one-for-one replacements on existing columns or utility poles. No real effort made to meet 1158 requirements, simply because of cost and the difficulties in adding additional columns in urban areas. Day to night, not necessarily the best photo, but this is another one of the tunnels in Wellington, where we've gone from overhead HPS to LED. This is Punakaiki, where we went from 250 SON HPS lighting the state highway to 4,000 Kelvin LED, probably around the 100 watt mark, I think. Someone on the call, Ray, will probably correct me. But in fact, when the Western Petrols are flying around, we just turn the lights off. Interesting conversations with the locals when we proposed this concept. Many of them said, yeah, we've got torches, not a problem. There's only about a dozen lights. It's not a big community, but it's a very popular outcome and it's worked really well. There'll be a copy of this in the material that goes around behind, but it's been a very popular move. It's almost becoming an annual event, the switching off of the lights. One of the state highway projects we did just south of Auckland, Drew to Pukekohe Rural State Highway, 4,000 LEDs replacing 250 watt sodiums. Very positive outcome there. Again, it's easier to see the yellow no overtaking line on the right hand side of the photo than on the left. It has had benefits for road safety. In terms of overall sky glow, this is Dunedin in the south of the South Island. The left-hand photo being high pressure sodium in July of 2016, and then 5 years later, predominantly 3,000 Kelvin LED. So quite a marked reduction in sky glow and waste light in general. We have the ongoing problems, I think Karen mentioned. Road lighting is often held up as the reason for all the sky glow. Sadly, I wish it was in some ways, because we can manage that. But at council level, we have a lot of problems with uncontrolled floodlights, car sales, tennis courts, high-rise buildings will play their part. I mean, if anyone's been down Darling Harbour on a Friday night, I quite enjoy going there on rare occasions and pointing out to people, actually find me a street light. This is Dunedin again, looking down the main street from Roslyn Hills down into Dunedin City itself. Quite a significant reduction in waste light, but a significant improvement in the ability and visual acuity side. And another one in Dunedin, Crawford Street, same issues. The road markings are so much easier to see, which is fine in good weather, but even greater advantage in wet weather. And that's me. I'll send this around after, but I'm happy to take any questions on the New Zealand situation and how we got where we are.
Julian, thank you so much. That's absolutely brilliant. I personally love the before and after photos. That's always my favourite. And yeah, really didn't realise about the actual switching off. Occasionally you hear about this, communities talking about it, or small areas, and of course we've got the dark sky organisations and a push for it. I wonder whether we could have a council here to be the first to do it. That was exceptional. So thank you so much for your time. I wish we could have had you on for longer. Of course, I'm sure everyone here would love to have 3 or 4 hours to talk about smart lighting and 3,000K lighting, but an hour is all we can do sometimes. I just want to quickly touch on some of the comments that are coming through here. And Paul, you've given us a great response to the issue around capturing the metered lighting savings and when they'll be reflected in the billing. And we had a question from Darren from Shoalhaven. We had about 4 or 5 questions in advance. Do you want to just give us the quick update? How are we going there? When's it going to happen? Give us a date, an exact date.
Well, listen, in 2019, we were suggesting it'd be within 2 years. I think we're 4 years later now. So it is taking a while, and I can't put a date on it. It will definitely happen. I guess the thing that we are seeing is that there's more and more benefits that we're unpacking. So the work of Parramatta and Glen Ira and a whole lot of other cities who have been implementing smart lighting projects that include dimming, trimming, and the other features is proving the case. It's proving that smart lighting makes sense, that it has really quite significant energy savings and emission savings. So, not in the 5 to 10, it's more like the 30 to 50% savings. They're quite large. So we're seeing really significant benefit at community level. So I'm very convinced that it will happen. There's a lot of work being done by IPWEA, by a whole lot of other organisations, including the Australian Energy Market Commission, I think that's the name, AEMC, to rewrite the rules so it's easier for smart lighting metering to occur. And so there is movement, it is happening. And because we're seeing that really concise and obvious community benefit, one thing I did mention in the chat was we're talking about energy and lighting. Equivalent savings are around asset management and road safety. And so just from a road safety perspective, it makes sense to put smart lighting on almost every single street light. So these benefits are there, and there is work being done by a whole lot of regulators and others to move this through, but it's taking a lot longer than we would have hoped. But it will come.
Thanks, Paul, for dodging the actual date then. I'm just going to say it's going to be June the 3rd, 2024. We can look back at this, and if I'm right. And just for those that are, and I know people are pretty aware of this particular issue, if it's newer to you, don't let that stop you from doing this project. You can simply look at factoring in potential delays into any business case. So you've got a bit of a buffer there. So it's, it shouldn't stop you from doing it. We had a lot of questions in advance around the human health and biodiversity impacts of lighting. I will point everyone to a webinar we did last year where we had Teresa Jones from the Melbourne University and her colleague, whose name escapes me right now, giving a lot of information and background about these issues, especially with metered lighting where councils have a lot more control. But I will just, if it's okay, bring Karen and Sal and Julian, please jump in if you like as well. What sort of resident complaints or comments did you have around wildlife following these changes? Karen, maybe starting with you, what was your experience, and did the smarts actually help with resident complaints?
Great question. I'm going to say resident engagement. In particular, I had a couple of residents who were very passionate about the breeding cycles of the brushtail and the ringtail possums on the lines and the streetlights out the front. So one of them has kept me updated with emails every now and then, which I think council staff will recognise. We get passionate people that it's probably been better for the ringtail possum movement, but this is very anecdotal and just a resident. There's nothing scientific, but it could potentially be a citizen science approach moving forward. We do have some residents interested in what's next with real-time data, and I did see a couple of comments about switching off lights. So while we're quite keen to head in the direction of the Northern Hemisphere for traffic flow, what real-time data will also allow us to do is Bureau of Meteorology, from a rain point of view and cloud cover, but we can also include full moon cycles. And when there is full moon, there is the option of maybe lights around a park or a wildlife corridor to be turned off, because the light from the moon is actually to Australian standards or to moon standards. So that could be sort of when the full moon is on, from a wildlife point of view, which our entomologists are very excited about. But again, it's what's next. I guess we're just doing the first step so others can learn from us, but the real-time data will allow us to go into that space.
Great. Karen, before I move on to the others, what about resident engagement when someone didn't like the light out the front of their house being too bright? Having smarts, does that help?
We haven't had a lot from the community. There's been a few saying the improved road coverage of the light is great. We've had probably two, and Ross can probably speak to this better than myself, around public transport internodes. So one key step that we did do was in-house with the lighting design is bring in nighttime accident data. We looked at where all our public transport intersections, like where the the public gather. We also looked at where they cross the road, so where the pedestrian islands are, where the pedestrian crossings are. We also looked at, in some particular cases, the gradient of the road and the angle of the road. So all of that was sort of brought in from staff from different backgrounds across the organisation: urban design, transport, wildlife, road safety. So they all helped come up with, I guess, what's being rolled out and trialled as the lighting designs. So those two inquiries we had was probably to turn the lights up a little bit more around a bus stop that 2 a.m. some health staff obviously clock off, and they were congregating and felt it could have been a little bit brighter. That was a 30-second change at a computer to brighten it back up. And we can do that on a case by case. We've had a couple of residents who have thanked us for reducing the light spill into their front yard and their bedrooms. So if anything, we've had more positive that it's helping them sleep better at night than we have actually about complaints.
Awesome. 30 seconds, eh? That's pretty good. Sal, do you want to have any comment on the issues or engagement around biodiversity and or being able to quickly fix any issues via smarts?
Yeah, look, I support what Karen said. Look, we've had 4-to-1 compliments versus complaints in this space from the community. I think the smarts gives us quick accessibility to the lighting and allows us to modify or to update or to at least know whether the lights were the status of the lights on and off. There's a lot of positives. One thing I probably would call out is community perception that Big Brother's watching when you put smarts in there. So one of the concerns that we were probably not inundated with, but we had a number of residents saying, well, what is these smarts? Do we get radiation from these smarts? All of these things. And I think once you sort of, able to inform them and update them that, no, that's not what this is about. This here is more of a community service. This is community lighting. And the smarts actually helps with the public lighting roadways. When they understood all that, it sort of put their questions at ease.
Awesome. Thank you, Sal. And pretty extraordinary, I imagine, from a distribution business to be having 4-to-1 congrats to complaints. I'd probably have a little, billboard. That's impressive. And Julian, what about your experience?
I think our experience here would parallel that Karen and Sal have had. I think the key thing is acknowledging the fine-tunability, if that's the right term, of digital lighting solution, and being able to tweak it for individual application. I think the key thing in a lot of the space around biodiversity is engaging with the right people. And if you can get the organisations who have an interest, I mean, things like Hutton Shearwater Trust and people like that, they've been fantastic to work with. As you engage, they understand your constraints, you understand their desires, and you can meet in the middle and have some form of optimal compromise. There always is a compromise. I think, ultimately the lighting is there for a purpose. If we don't need it, we wouldn't put it in because it costs money to install, it costs money to operate. Using LED is cheaper, but there's still a significant cost to the road controlling agency. I think the technology has improved significantly over the last 10 years or so. It will continue to improve. The controls will continue to improve. And I think the suppliers deserve credit in that space for coming up with actually useful solutions as opposed to solutions looking for a problem. There's a lot of good work being done in terms of fine-tuning of optics and fine-tuning of electronics to remove harmonic effects and spurious noise effects, as well as things like flicker and color, and getting continuity and good optics for lighting design. So I think it's an exciting time for those of us who've been around a while. It's the first time in the last 40 years I think we've had such a significant change in lighting technology, and I think if you combine that with treating lighting infrastructure as sort of a vertical powered infrastructure, and you've essentially got a USB plug on the top with your NEM or a Zaga socket, the opportunities are endless.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julian. We are going to have to wrap it up, but please jump on and give us some feedback. Before, don't jump off just yet though, because I'm going to show you what happens if you give us some feedback. And for example, we often think about whether these become 1 hour, like 90-minute webinars. Is 60 minutes enough? We try to blend in as many of the questions that came in advance into the discussion points. But if you think it needs to be longer, if you think there needs to be less time on presenters and more time for Q&A, or if you wanted to hear more from Julian, Sal and Karen, please do let us know. That's a really quick survey. And plus, once you fill this in, you'll get this free report, which is from a webinar last year. It's about making metered making metered lighting smart and simple. And so just some kind of 3 key questions that councils need to ask themselves before doing metered lighting. And there was a lot of focus on the biodiversity and the lighting colour issues. And so colleagues here, Abhishek especially and Ross, did a lot of work in this one. You'll also get the webinar slides, the ones that we had, and of course the ones that Karen and Julian had as well. So all the information there and all the photos, the before and after stuff. Please jump on. Thanks to the crew at the back end who have just given us that jot form. Just click on that link, probably 2 or 3 minutes of your time. That's absolutely it. And then we can, I guess, know what we can do next time. But all your feedback is really welcome. We try our best to incorporate it. Thank you again, Karen, Sal and Julian. It was brilliant to hear from you. I know personally I'd much prefer these to be 90 minutes and give you a good 10, 15, but we've only got a limited amount of time. But we really appreciate you guys coming along and sharing your insights today. And of course to Abhishek, Ross and all those crew on the back end as well, Paul, Keith, James, Charlotte, Rachel, I'm sorry if I've missed anyone there, but yeah, thanks for getting those questions. Maybe we'll try and even copy all of the data from the chat and put it into a document or something informally and quickly get it up. We really appreciate it. We'll catch you next time. Enjoy the rest of your day. See you later.
Thank you, everybody.